So we are on page 92 and 93 in your yellow workbook. I'm going to do just a few examples on 92 and 93. I picked 6 to do with special right triangles just in case you need a little extra support on how to find the missing sides. So hopefully by now you've watched the videos over the special right triangles 45, 45, 90 and 30, 60, 90. So I'm just going to do these 6 examples to help practice those. All right. So on number 5, what happens is you notice it's a rectangle, but because the rectangle is sliced in half and it has a 30 and a 90, you know this angle has to be 60. It doesn't really matter that the rest of this is a triangle over here. Just focus on your 30, 60, 90. Okay, if it's a 30, 60, 90, you want to label across from the 30 is the short side, across from the 60 is the long side, and across from the 90 is what's considered the hypotenuse. Okay, so everything starts with the short side. So you go to the short side first and you see if there's anything on it. There is nothing listed on the short side, but we need to find that first. So what they did give us was the long side. So we definitely need to get from the long side to the short side first. We never want to go between the long and the hypotenuse. So to go from the long side to the short side, you're going to go back and look at your relationships. The long side is the short side times the square root of 3. So we're going to take 10, and instead of timesing by the square root of 3, since we're going backwards and getting smaller, we want to divide by the square root of 3. So I'm going to do what's called rationalizing, and I'm going to get rid of the radical on the bottom. That's going to give me 10 square root of 3 over 3, because this is the square root of 9, which turns into 3. Then I look to see if I can reduce the 10 and the 3. I cannot, so I'm going to leave it 10 square root of 3 over 3. And that's what x is, which is the short side. Now I'm still trying to find y, so I'm going to go from short to hypotenuse. When you go from short to hypotenuse, the hypotenuse is twice as long as the short side. So I'm going to take 10 square root of 3 over 3 times 2 over 1. So you only want to take the 10 times 2, not the square root and not the bottom. So you end up getting 20 square root of 3 over 3, and that ends up being your hypotenuse. So when you double, you only double the number that's out front of the radical. Don't double the radical or the denominator. So y is 20 square root of 3 over 3. I would leave that as a fraction. It's just a very ugly decimal when you deal with that, and so if you just leave it as a fraction, it makes it a little cleaner. Okay, so that's number 5. Now I'm going to go down to number 8. So they are not coming out and telling me this, but I can tell that this is a square. So I know that when you cut a square in half, it becomes a 45, 45, 90. The other thing I notice is the base angles have to match in an isosceles triangle. So if they match and it adds to 180, they're both 45. Okay, in a 45, 45, 90, I have 2 legs and I have a hypotenuse. And if I'm at the hypotenuse and I want to get to the leg, the number that you have to remember is the leg times radical 2 is always the hypotenuse. So if I want to go from the hypotenuse back to the leg, I'm going to be dividing because I'm getting smaller. So I'm going to be taking 18 and dividing by the square root of 2, which means I have to rationalize. So I get 18 square root of 2. That gives me the square root of 4, which just makes 2. Now, unlike the number 5 that I just did, these two are divisible. 18 is divisible by 2. So you can change that to 18 divided by 2 and make it 9. That means this leg is 9 radical 2, but this leg is also 9 radical 2, because in a 45, 45, 90, it's isosceles. It's an isosceles right triangle, so the legs both match, which makes it a little easier than your 30, 60, 90s. Okay, next I'm going to go to number 10. So number 10 says, sketch the figure that they're describing and then answer the question. Okay, so we have an equilateral triangle. So I'm going to sketch that. It says the perimeter is 21. So I'm going to take 21 divided by 3, and I'm going to get 7. So this is 7, 7, and 7. Then I'm going to drop an altitude straight down from the top, and that's going to split my 60-degree angle into 30, 30, and then these base angles are still 60 because I didn't bisect them. So the altitude actually bisects each angle in an equilateral triangle. Okay, so what's going to happen is that's going to split my 7 into 3.5 and 3.5. Or if you want, you can leave it 7 over 2. It's up to you. All right, so what they're asking for is the length of the altitude. So I'm going to put an X on the altitude. We're trying to find this length. So we're going to look at our 30, 60, 90, and we're going to label short, long, and hypotenuse. So 3.5 is my short, 7 is my hypotenuse, and the x that I'm trying to find is my long side. So I need to look at the short side, and I do have a number on it. So I'm going to go from short to long. So to go from short to long, you multiply by radical 3. That is always the constant you use, and we discovered that on our notes the other day. So we're going to be taking 3.5 and multiplying by radical 3. So that's your answer. Or if you want to leave it as a fraction, it would be 7 over 2 radical 3, or you could even write it 7 radical 3 over 2. So all of those are options for different ways of writing it. Okay, now we're going to go to number 12. So again, we have an equilateral triangle. So I'm going to draw an equilateral triangle. It says the altitude is 18. So I'm going to drop an altitude straight down, and I'm going to put an 18 on the altitude. All right, and then we're going to put our angles in. So the 60-degree angle was bisected into 30 and 30 by the altitude. These base angles are both 60. And it wants us to find the length of a side of the triangle and then find the perimeter. So I'm going to put an X on this side because I'm going to find that side, which might be easier than looking at the bottom. And I'm going to label, this is my short across from 30, this is my long across from 60, and I'm looking for the hypotenuse, which is the length of a side. Okay, in my 30, 60, 90, they started us with the 18, and we need to get to the short side. So you always go to the short first. You never go between the long and the hypotenuse. So I need to take my long and go to my short. So the number on the long is always radical 3. So I'm going to take 18 and divide it by radical 3, which means rationalize. So I get 18 radical 3 over, that's a square root of 9, which is just 3. And then I look to see if these can reduce. They can, so I get 6. Okay, now that is not my answer yet. That is this short side, which is 6 radical 3, which means this piece is also 6 radical 3 because that altitude splits the base in half. So when I add those together, or you can think of it as going from short to the hypotenuse, I need to times that by 2 to get to my hypotenuse. So 6 radical 3 times 2, or you can add them together, gives you 12 radical 3. So 12 radical 3 is the length of a side. And then if it wants the perimeter, I do 12 radical 3 times 3 sides, and I get 36 radical 3. So remember, when you multiply, don't multiply the radical by the number. You're taking the number times the number, and then the radical is like a variable. It just hangs out in the back. Okay, 2 more. We're going to go over to page 93. I'm going to do number 13. So this is a 90, 60, and so I know by adding up to 180 that has to be a 30. So I'm going to label across from the 30 is the short, across from the 60 is the long, across from the 90 is the hypotenuse. All right, I want to get to the short. Well, they gave us the short, which is good news because now we can go from the short to the long, and we can go from the short to the hypotenuse individually. So let's just go short to hypotenuse. So the number on the hypotenuse is always 2. So we need to take 4 radical 3 and times by 2. So again, you just take the 4 times the 2 and you keep the radical 3 like a variable in the back. So the hypotenuse would be 8 radical 3. Okay, now we're going to go back to the short, and we're going to go from short to long because we never go between hypotenuse and long. So if the short is 4 radical 3, on the long is always radical 3. So I need to take 4 radical 3, and I'm going to be getting larger, so I'm going to times by radical 3. That's going to give me 4 radical 9. Now I do multiply those. Well, radical 9 is just 3, so I have to simplify this out and make it 4 times 3 so that I actually get a number for an answer, and my long side will be 12. So if you ever have a radical that's a perfect square, you need to take the square root of that and then multiply. Okay, last example is number 21. On number 21, this is kind of a mixture problem because you have 2 different types of triangles. So we have a 45, 45, 90 and a 30, 60, 90. All right, and it doesn't have what you're trying to find, so we are going to find all the missing parts since the diagram says to find the missing parts. So every piece. Okay, so let's just start with our 45, 45, 90. This is the hypotenuse, and these are my legs. Okay, so I want to go from hypotenuse to the legs, so I'm getting smaller, so that's dividing. And I divide by the constant radical 2 because that's the constant we use in a 45, 45, 90. Okay, now you don't need to rationalize, so if you notice these 2 match, you can just cancel and just get 4. which means the legs of my 45, 45, 90 are both 4. Now I'm going to go into my 30, 60, 90, and in my 30, 60, 90, I'm going to label across from the 30 is the short, across from the 90 is the long, and across from the 60 is, I'm sorry, this is hypotenuse, across from the 90, and then across from the 60 is the long. So our long is 4, and we're trying to get to the short. So you have to ask yourself, how do you get from long to short? Well, the number on long is radical 3, but we're going backwards. We're getting smaller. So we're going to take 4, and we're going to have to divide it by radical 3, which means rationalize. So you get 4 radical 3 over 3. So that makes this short side right here 4 radical 3 over 3. So that is this side. Now we're at the short, and we need to get to the hypotenuse to find our last piece. So you ask yourself, how do you get from short to hypotenuse? Well, you're getting longer, so you're going to be multiplying. And you're going to multiply by a constant of 2. So we're going to need to take 4 square root of 3 over 3. We need to take that times 2 over 1. Remember, you just take the 4 times the 2, and you take 3 times 1. So your final answer for that is going to be 8 square root of 3 over 3. That is going to be your hypotenuse, which goes right here. So this is 8 square root of 3 over 3. Those are just a few questions from your workbook practice to help you. If you're still having trouble, make sure you reach out and let me know. Thanks.